This Windows setting might be killing your FPS just a bit. Today we're going to have a look at core isolation. Should we have it off or on? Now, core isolation is made to protect the operating system and isolate it away for its critical processes, at least from what I've gathered online. Today we're going to be having a look at a benchmark of 6 games at 1080p to see if you should have this setting off or on. We have some pretty interesting results, so let's go ahead and hear from our sponsor today, Keysfan.com.
This guy still has unactivated Windows. I keep telling him to activate it, but he won't listen. You know what that means.
Bro, this guy locked the door again. I know how to fix this. Where's my wallet? Check out Keysfan.com for cheap Windows keys. If you use coupon code BEZ50, you can get 50% off Windows licenses. And if you use code BEZ62, you can get 62% off Microsoft Office, and they also have a Microsoft Office and Windows 11 bundle. You can pay via PayPal, and they have a pretty good customer support team. Check out Keysfan, linked in the description. And don't get locked in your room with Mr. Gorilla. For this test, we will be using the Ryzen 7 7800X3D with PBO enabled. We will have the RX 9070 XT as our graphics card, and its stock will be using 32GB of G.Skill DDR5 6000 CL30 RAM. Our motherboard is the ASRock X870E Taichi Lite with AMD SAM enabled. Our operating system is Windows 11 Pro 25H2, and take a note of our AMD drivers as there is a slight difference. For Windows 11 Pro with core isolation on, we're using AMD driver 26.3.1, and when it's off, we're using 26.1.1. For our testing settings, our CPU is on PBO, the GPU is stock with no overclock, all games are tested in full screen, games are tested one at a time, VSync is off, frame rate is on cap. Of course, we don't have any ray trace testing. DLSS and FSR, well, FSR in this case is off. AMD SAM is on. We're using AMD driver 26.3.1. Operating system is Windows 11 Pro 25H2, and all games are tested on a 3-run average. Let's head over to the games. Our first game is Counter-Strike 2. Now, in terms of percentage difference, it's not too much here, but our average FPS does have a raw difference of 30 FPS for average FPS, and a difference of 5 FPS for the 1% lows, both in favor of core isolation being off. So we can see here it is a nice little uplift that we have when core isolation is off compared to when it's on. Next up, we have Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty, and there's a little bit of a difference here. As we can see, the average FPS goes from 177 to 200 when core isolation is off, and our 1% lows go from 103 when it's on to 119 when it's off. So as we can see, Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty actually has a bit of an impact when core isolation is on in this game. Our next game is Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered. And as we can see here, there is a bit of a difference. So we have a percentage difference of 7% in favor of when core isolation is off in average FPS, and our 1% lows shows a 9% percentage difference. By turning this feature on in this game, we lost 13 FPS on the average FPS and 11 FPS on the 1% lows. Next up, we have Marvel Rivals. And it's quite interesting here that we don't have too much of a difference between when core isolation was on or when it was off. We can see there's just a difference of 3 FPS for average FPS, and there was no difference in terms of the 1% lows. Riftbreaker is up next, and we have a little bit of an interesting result here. As we can see, with our percentage difference for average FPS, it was 3%, but our 1% lows had a percentage difference of 10%. While not too big a margin here as the numbers are a little bit smaller, we can see that there is a bit of a favor when core isolation is off. Our last game here is Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2. We can see here that there was a difference of just 5 FPS on average FPS and a difference of 6 FPS for 1% lows. As a whole, we can see there's a bit of a difference between when core isolation was on and off. And let's head over to our overall percentage difference graphs to see what the actual difference is when it was on or off. For our overall percentage difference graphs, we can see that for average FPS, having core isolation on resulted in a 4.9% slower average FPS across these 6 games at 1080p. Our largest percentage difference here is Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty, which is 12% in favor of core isolation being off. Marvel Rivals, Riftbreaker, and Counter-Strike 2 didn't have too much of a difference, but I do have to note that Counter-Strike 2 did lose like 30 FPS, so of course the percentage difference isn't too large, but the actual raw number is a little bit larger. When we head over to our 1% lows, we can see that core isolation being on resulted in slower performance of 6.7% on average 1% lows for these 6 games at 1080p. We can see Marvel Rivals didn't have a difference here. Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty had the biggest percentage difference at 13% in favor of it being off. And then next we have Riftbreaker, which was interesting because Riftbreaker on the average FPS was only a 3% difference in favor of it being off, and here it's a 10% difference on the 1% lows. Horizon Zero Dawn as well, a negative 9% in favor of the core isolation being off, and then Space Marine 2 at negative 6%. So we can see that from all of these games, it's better to just have it off than it is to have it on. As we saw, core isolation being on is not exactly a good thing for gaming. While the performance differences aren't actually that large overall from what we saw of these 6 games, I do have to say that it is a net negative overall to leave this setting on. While I do think you could play devil's advocate here and be like, okay, when core isolation was on, the average FPS only dropped by 4.9% overall. Okay, that's fair enough. And for our 1% lows of 6.7%, I do think you're leaving a little bit of FPS on the table by having this setting on. Now, of course, maybe do a little bit of research. Do you actually need this feature on or not? I don't really think so, in my opinion, and I don't personally leave it on. And as we saw as well in the game like Cyberpunk 2077, for example, at a performance difference of negative 12%, or 12% in favor of when it was off, and as well on a game like CS2, on average FPS, it was a difference of like 30 FPS or so on average for average FPS. So I wouldn't exactly say that it's a setting that you should leave on, in my opinion, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to compile all of these Windows optimizations, quote unquote, settings, and actually test them out one by one on just purely FPS to see which ones actually make a difference. Now, of course, there are some settings that will probably make a difference to the game in terms of how fluid it is, but I do want to just do objective tests on how much of a difference does it make to the FPS. So we have a couple more coming. For example, like XMP, it's a pretty obvious one, rebar, and a couple more Windows settings. And I saw this PowerShell script that you can also use to optimize Windows, which will be pretty interesting to use as well. That about sums up the video. Check out wisetech.org for some more awesome content, but other than that, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!